we see this stuff as primitive, as, kind of weird and crazy. We call a lot of these things rituals, sacrifices and stuff that means bad things to us. But to these people, to the ancients, this stuff was normal. They understood what it was and what they were doing. They understood the meaning behind it and the science behind it. See, we took those aspects, those things that they was trying to get out of these so-called rituals in their culture. We took these things and we identified them with math and science and things that we invented, things that, human beings made up. But to the ancients, this was just normal stuff, normal common sense stuff, normal things that they understood how to do to bring about results, to change their reality. And when you start to understand that and think about it in those contexts and just say, this is something that is natural, there's power to it. These people were doing this stuff for a reason. You start looking at it in a different light and understanding that in order to get out of it what the ancients got out of it, you have to embrace it the same way they embraced it, as far as putting it in your ordinary life, your everyday life, and not thinking about this stuff in terms of ritual, sacrifice, math, science, or what have you. This is how we label this stuff. But to the ancients, there was no such thing. They didn't use these words. This is natural things, natural stuff. And I want to say that to get it across to people to understand that you have been basically deceived by words and wordplay. Words are magic. You have to understand that it was created for a specific reason, to deceive you and to confuse you. But you have to look through that and understand that at a particular time, these words did not exist, yet the power of what you're bringing together using words was always here, and it has a purpose. Now, when I look back to ancient Kemet and I seen karate, when I seen the depictions of martial arts, to me at first it was just like, well, okay, wow, this stuff was here so long ago. We thought it came from the Orient, came from, the Asians, but here it is in ancient Kemet, old. And to my knowledge, there isn't any depictions of martial arts that predate what we find in ancient Kemet, which we can find going back to 3000 BCE. So unless somebody can produce anything that shows that they had these particular skills and was putting stuff out before then to us, the Egyptians came up with it. They developed the techniques or what have you. But from looking at it, you would just think, hey, this is about, self-defense, martial arts protection, Kemet always was under threat at some point in time. But when you go back 3000 BCE, it wasn't too much problems that you would think they would need to develop such a, technique and a strategy. So in looking at it on the surface, I was thinking, okay, well, this is the purpose. This is what it was for. But as I have explained and showed you guys, the ancient Egyptians knew the body. They knew about the mind. They knew all of this stuff, and they put it in so many different things. Now, I have talked to you about how hip hop music, how we have the subliminal message, how we have the controlling of our minds and music, and how music affects the brain. I've talked about this countless times and will continue to talk about it. But you have to understand that the ancient Egyptians already knew about it. They understood how music affects the brain. So when you see ancient Egyptian depictions of music bands, them playing musical instruments, we would call it today classical music, developing the mind, stimulating the mind, as I talked about. When you see depictions of them dancing, singing, we would call this stuff, ballet. R&B or soul or whatever. We will call it what we call it. But to them, this was just natural. So when you see these depictions of dancing and, and singing and bands playing and all kinds of stuff that we look at today and we take an entertainment value from it. And we look to ancient Kemet and we would think the same, but it's a lot more to it that the ancient Egyptians understood, and they knew how to get everything out of it. So when we look at, martial arts, when we look at this stuff, these depictions, and we say that, this stuff is martial arts, we think about Kung Fu, we think about karate or what have you, when we see these depictions, but to them, it wasn't such. Of course, they didn't use those names, but the ancient Egyptians understood the movement. They understood what the stuff was really about and what it would do. They understood that these movements not only, strengthened the muscles, but it sharpened the mind. These movements allow energy to flow through the body, to flow in different parts of the body. Different movements just loosen up the body and allow energy to flow so you can feel energy flowing freely through different parts of the body. And this is one of the main reasons why they did it. It not only, help sharpen the mind, help you connect muscle memory to, cognitive memory to your consciousness, but it also helped with meditation. It also helped you strengthen the muscles so you can sit in the lotus position, a meditative state for long periods of time. And this is one of the ways that they did it. This is one of the ways they developed to help you deal with those issues. And this is one of the processes you had to go through in becoming, like, let's just say like a grand master or a master or moving up as far as in the ancient Egyptian mystery school. Martial arts was one of it. And you had to understand, about the body, of course, and that these movements were to loosen you up, to help energy flow freely. When the Asians talk about chi flowing through the body, they understood all of this and that energy needed to flow freely and you needed to be loose and be able to be comfortable to sit in that lotus position for long periods of time to meditate. So they worked on these things, and this was the purpose of this stuff, to not only, help you with meditation and help energy flow, but to also give you skills as far as movement and combat ability, in any type of altercations that might occur. So when you look at the ancient Egyptians and understand that they had basically what we call classical music, as I said, develops the brain, stimulates the brain, makes you smarter, makes you retain more knowledge. They understood this. When you look at the depictions and see that they had forms of ballet that help with movement, grace, something that help you develop energy-wise. All these things that we see that we find today in our society that we look at too as being refined, showing that these people have class, that they are of a high status because they, partake in such events. So as I talked about in the Calculated Destruction of the Black Man and Woman, about how they got all dressed up and fancy and went to watch people, put on tutus and do ballet and, play classical music or what have you. This was because they associated these things with, wealth, refinement, or what have you. And many of the people there had absolutely no clue that this stuff goes back to energy, consciousness, and that it's going to develop you better in these areas and help stimulate you. So they basically took the good things from us, from ancient Kemet, the things that will help us develop and stimulate us spiritually and physically. They took these things out of ancient Kemet, kept them for themselves. Told us nothing about it. We just watched and wondered, like, what are these crazy people doing? Took it for themselves. We were stuck to, just develop jazz, the blues, singing about our sorrows and pain, not listening to music that will help stimulate us. And don't get me wrong, you have the blues and you have jazz that does create good stimulation, but not as such as what classical music, because when you have blues and you have jazz not always, but blues, you have words attached to it. Having words attached that is not going to be, stimulus to the actual sound. So words that's not going to help develop the sound, then it's really no point in having the words. The words could be a problem because, as I talked about, when you combine words with music, that's a message. Words are powerful. You got to be careful what you say. So you don't really want to associate certain words in musical form because they have dual meaning. It's better to just have the music. This is something deep that we'll get into down the line when we get more into music, but the ancient Egyptians understood this. This is why, as I talked about in the Frequency DVD, about them combining Satan and putting him with music and, the music industry, and how the word was God and Satan was the music. And when you combine the two, you have basically persuasion. And that's what it was about. So when you understand the parable and what it was talking about, Satan basically played the music, the choir director, you could say, while God was the word. And he spoke, and you combine them and you have song, which music can be stimulating and persuasive. Music on its own without the words can be persuasive. So this is just a whole bunch of things that just go along, with everything. But understand how they took classical music, they took ballet, It took everything that would stimulate them and develop them to be higher and function in higher brain capacities than us. They kept for themselves, and we end up with gangster rap, hip hop, R&B, stuff that is destroying us mentally and physically, causing the downfall of our civilization, causing the downfall of us. And this is what we have to deal with, and this is what they allow us to promote and make our people rich off, because it's destroying us more than it's helping us. So we got to look at this stuff and understand that if it wasn't ancient Kemet, it was there for a reason. And this stuff we need to come back to and start, developing more ourselves and getting more engaged in ourselves, instead of leaving it to the Europeans to have and take and control when it came from us. And it's crazy when you look at other civilizations, you look at people throughout history that are known for things. They're known for something specific. You look at countries that are known for something specific, groups of people known for something specific. And then you go back to ancient Kemet and you find out, guess what? It was there first. And it's like, damn, no credit was given. Nobody said anything. It's just we was led to believe that certain people developed certain things. But then when we go back to ancient Kemet, we see that it was there first. And, somebody always throw that little depiction in there, whether it's believed that the ancient Egyptians discovered it, or that, it was found first here in ancient Kemet, always to leave doubt that it's possibly somebody who developed it before them. But there's no proof. So it's weird when you find that kind of stuff. But when you go back and you see the depictions of martial arts, and you think about, Bruce Lee, who we'll get into a lot in this video, and you think about just martial arts in Asia, a lot of people don't have no clue exactly where it came from. We just all assume it came from, ancient Asia with the Asians. But when you go to ancient Kemet and look at martial arts, they call it lotus fighting, which we understood how important the lotus was to ancient Kemet. It symbolized rebirth, with the opening of the petals when the sun rises and the closing of the petals at night. They related it to the sun, of course, which the sun was revered. When you look at it in Buddhism, of course, the same thing. The lotus symbolized spiritual awakening and purity, because you had a lotus, which is also called a water lily, which basically sprang up, from the dirt, the dirty water, from the water, what have you, and came out and, opened up perfectly clean, pure, no dirt, no mud, no soot, or nothing on the petals. It always sprang and opened up clean and clear. And the Buddhists looked at it as, the lotus made a conscious decision to basically say, I'm not going to get dirty. I'm going to come up, I'm going to be clean, I'm going to be pristine, in good condition, and I'm going to show off. And this is how, the Buddhists looked at it, so they associated with spiritual enlightenment, the lotus, which is why Buddha, you always see him sitting on top of the lotus in the lotus position, which is why they call it that, because they associate meditation, of course, with spiritual enlightenment, as well as the lotus. And we see, as I talked about before in Buddhism, how it goes hand in hand with Osiris and the lotus, and, Shiva, what have you, everything we find with the lotus. And I showed you in Buddhism 1 and 2 about how there is no way you can look at Buddhism and not trace it back to ancient Kemet and see that that's where it came from. It's clear as day when you look at this stuff. So you can do your own research on that and just look and see the comparisons. There's just no way. So you have to think about, ancient India, trading, and what was going on around that time. Now, we know they had Heraklion, which sank. The whole city I talk about that Frank Gaudio discovered, Heraklion that sank. And this was a huge trading port that so many civilizations came in and out and did trade. We talked about in Ancient History Part 1 about Tyre, about how, the Phoenicians did trade there, and how another huge trade port. But when you look at where India is and think about so much of the trade going on in those two places, and, of course, in India, they wasn't going to take that long, camel caravan ride all the way up to Tyre or Heraklion to do trades. So they had to sail across, which was a lot easier, into Ethiopia, and vice versa. The Africans sailed into India to do trade. Now, when you look at, the map, and you understand, of course, we have the Nile. We have the Nile all up and down the Nile. You had little trade ports there, and people that traded up and down the Nile. And when you pay attention, you have the Nile coming down into northern Sudan. And it basically separates, like right at the middle part of Sudan, and you have it going one way towards Ethiopia. It basically goes into Ethiopia and curls up into Axum. And you have the Blue Nile there. That's the Blue Nile that curls up into Axum in Ethiopia. Then it keeps going south, and you have the White Nile. But the Nile definitely went into Ethiopia with the Blue Nile. You have there one of the greatest African civilizations right off the Nile. You have the Aksumite Empire, another African civilization where you had African kings and rulers that ruled there, and they had a thriving port there and a thriving civilization right off the Nile that a lot of people have no clue about. Now, we're going to get into this history because it's very important. Now, it basically goes with everything anyway. It's one of the things a lot of people don't understand about the connection between Africa and Rome and how you can see how they was coming into Africa a lot and doing things. This is completely hidden from history, and it's stuff that they just don't talk about, because when you understand the history, it's like, what the fuck was Rome doing? It's how you can see who's in power and who was doing what when you understand about these African empires that once existed. So we're going to talk about this because it fits and it goes in, with the line of history. So understand, one, when you talk about the Aksumite Empire, we're talking about, these are the kings that they call Negus. When you hear people refer to kings as Negus, the black African kings, this was in Ethiopia. So you had this whole empire last from about the first century AD up until like the 4th century AD, I believe, or the 10th century AD, I should say. And it lasts for a long time. This was a thriving area. It was once part of the Kushite Empire at one time, and it separated, and you have this huge thriving empire that Rome knows a lot about. So you had the King Ezana, basically convert the civilization to Christianity. Now we have correspondence between Constantine and King Ezana. Constantine calling him his brother, his friend. So we have letters that they wrote, correspondence between each other with them being on good terms. Now I have a lot of knowledgeable Christians, the ones who know some things, who think I don't know anything. I have a lot. It's a lot of debates I do behind the scenes that you guys don't know. People don't want to do it, video wise or, publicly. They want to do it in messages or what have you. But I have had quite a few people bring up King Ezana as far as giving validity to the Ethiopian Bible and giving validity to somehow the Africans developing Christianity in the Bible. The problem is when you get a person who does actual research, one of the things that this land is famous for, the Aksumite Empire is famous for, is its obelisks. They have a bunch of obelisks there and a bunch of stelas there showing the connection to Nubia and ancient Kemet. So we find stelas in Nubia, we find obelisks in ancient Kemet. We know that they came down. The knowledge right there flows right into their land. Obviously, the ancient Egyptians was coming down and trading. We know about the connections between them all. So you have the ancient Egyptian influence with these obelisks and these stelas in Ethiopia and the Aksumite Empire before, King Ezana converted to Christianity. The knowledge was lost, and there was no real connection to the understanding of what was going on back then and what the connection was with ancient Kemet. So you had this king come about and convert to Christianity, most likely for political reasons or political gain or what have you. And that's what happened. And when you put in, Constantine into the mix, you can see exactly what it was. But you have for centuries, the Romans, which the Romans used Axumus as a trade port, a trade route. They basically did a lot of trade out of that port. This is why Constantine and King Ezana was so cool, because he allowed them to do a lot of business there. So understand that. So we understand that they took, so many artifacts from out of there. We have in 1932, you have Rome basically come in there and pick up one of the obelisks, that they knocked down a long time ago. I showed you the pictures. that they was just pulling down. They came in there and it was pulling down the obelisk to basically try to hide the connection with ancient Kemet. And they came in Oximus and pulled down a lot of these stelas and a lot of the obelisks, and they broke. A lot of them broke, when they came down. So you had in 1932 Rome come in there and basically pick up the pieces of one and take it back to Rome. So when you go into Britain, when you go into a lot of these museums, you find a lot of ancient Egyptian artifacts, a lot of African artifacts, because the Brits, you have the Romans, you have a lot of these civilizations, these people coming into African civilizations, ancient civilizations, and stealing artifacts. If it wasn't for people like Richard Pankhurst, who basically leads a team who goes into a lot of these countries and try to get the artifacts back, the Ethiopians wouldn't have gotten back the obelisk from Rome. They got it back in 2005 because they led a team and did a lot of lobbying to get that obelisk returned back to the Ethiopians. In 2005, they got it returned back. But you had the Africans and you had a lot of European groups who have for years. It's another thing that is not talked about that a lot of people don't know about. That's why I always try to talk about unity, because I've seen it in action and I've seen us get things done with unity. But if it wasn't for these Africans working together with these Europeans to go into a lot of different places, not just in Europe, but in Asia as well, into a lot of these museums that have a lot of African artifacts, to get these things returned back to the people, because this stuff was stolen. It's stolen property. You can't just go into somebody's country and town because it's in turmoil, because of some kind of war that was basically inflicted on them, and just take their possessions, their valuables. Yet it has been done to us for centuries, of course. A lot of people don't even have a clue that Rome attacked Ethiopia, that Rome and Ethiopia went to war. People don't remember that Rome used chemical weapons on Ethiopia. This was around the time that Haile Selassie was in power, and he went to the United Nations and complained about it. So when people start talking about this Ethiopian Bible and Ethiopian creating Christianity or what have you, they don't know the damn history. They don't know what they're talking about. You have to go back and look at what was going on back then to understand that the Romans was coming in there for hundreds of years, for a long time, destroying shit, stealing artifacts. They pulled down a lot of those obelisks, the one they could pull down. They stole one. And this is what has been going on in so many different places in Africa. It's no coincidence that you go into the Sudan, you go into Ethiopia. As I talked about, what the hell is these people doing with a president, with a constitution that is Roman? And you have the Moors bragging about constitutions and shit like that. And come on, it's bullshit. Pay attention to what this stuff is about. The Roman Senate was set up the same way. They came in there, and you have to understand that we've been warring with these Europeans for a long time, and they have won in every single case. You have some places that's so remote that they don't want to go into, that they leave alone, because for the most part, it's not that much resources there. But any other place, they either turn the people against each other. They find one tribe that doesn't like another tribe, and they arm them or train them to go in there and wipe out other Africans, and we just so lost and don't see what this whole thing is about, that these Africans just do what they got to do sometimes to survive, because they in fear that their village will get wiped out if they don't. But also, a lot of them are, basically poor, and they need, stuff to survive, and supplies or what have you. So we see despicable things happen in Africa, but they are encouraged, influenced, and pushed, and in every way backed by these Europeans and these European powers, and they know exactly what they're doing. So we know why they're in Africa. We got to understand that. But you got to understand, to get back to my point, that, when you go back and look, the reason why this history is important, because it establishes a connection between, India coming into Ethiopia. When we look at those trade routes and understand that the Egyptians was coming down the Nile, that the Indians was coming over into Ethiopia, and they was trading right there. And in the Aximus Empire, the Axumite Empire, they was trading right along the Nile. They was trading with Ethiopia, and all the proof is there. The artifacts is there. The correspondence, the contacts, everything is there to show this connection. And that when you see the influence in Ethiopia, of course, you can imagine that the influence when the Indians came into Ethiopia, they could see it. and that when you had the Egyptians travel over to India and, what have you, that the influence definitely was brought there as well. And this is how Buddhism was, basically traveled, and how we can see it accepted by many different cultures. So when we look at the depictions of karate and martial arts in ancient Kemet, we can see that this is clearly where it generated from. Which karate, karate, you have ka, which is your energy or soul. We know Ra, which is the sun, or your pineal gland, your third eye, dealing with the mind. And you have Te, which means you, your body. So we have karate. Karate is mind, body, and soul. When you put it all together, mind, body, and soul as one. So we look at this and understand the spiritual aspect and, the deep connection from karate and how it can translate into what the ancient Egyptians talked about and what they talk about in spirituality terms and, Buddhism, ancient Kemet, or what have you. So a lot of people, when they look at India, they don't look at India and think about martial arts. And that's crazy because India has a very ancient history, still to this day, going back with martial arts. We find unbelievable skills. When you think about kickboxing, remember first, you had the people migrate over into India before they even got into Thailand, before they became the Thai people. They was in India first. So, which is why we see India taking Buddhism over to Asia, and India taking kickboxing, the fighting techniques into Thailand. So you got to think about that. A lot of people always don't make that connection. When you look at Thai, it is a lot of Indian tradition mixed up in there. When you travel a lot, you see it. When you go back and forth to both places, you can see the mix. You see the elephant a lot. We understand the symbolism behind a lot of these things. But a lot of people don't make that connection with martial arts in India. And they have a history that goes back, past 1000 BCE with martial arts when you look at the Vedas. And the Vedas is basically like it's written in Sanskrit. It's basically the ancient history of Indian literature, put right there. You have the Vedas talking about, martial arts, talking about fighting techniques. You have the Dharma Veda, which translates into the science of archery, where you have them do techniques with the bow and other techniques using other weapons and, martial arts, combat skills or what have you. You have also Malayada, which translates into combat wrestling. And we know how important combat wrestling was in ancient Kemet, what we talked about before with the Egyptians holding wrestling competitions with the Nubians. So we have Dharma Veda, which goes into the science of archery and the military science of India. You have Malayada, which deals with combat wrestling. And we can see in ancient Kemet clearly, they used the bow. We can see about combat wrestling. We can see how all this stuff, corresponds with each other, how we find it in the civilizations in ancient Kemet and in India. So it's not a coincidence that we find wrestling in ancient India and we find wrestling in ancient Kemet and Nubia, what have you, because they share a lot of the same spiritualities and practices and what have you. So now we have Bodhidharma. And a lot of people don't know about Bodhidharma unless you really get into Buddhism. And Bodhidharma, which a lot is not known about his young life. He's believed to be a prince, son of an Indian king. And Bodhidharma was a Buddhist monk. Bodhidharma is considered basically the first Chinese patriarch because he's credited with bringing not only Chan Buddhism into China, but being one of the forefathers of Shaolin Kung Fu. So the legend goes with Bodhidharma, he came into China and went to the Shaolin Temple and noticed that the monks there could not meditate for long periods of time without falling asleep. So Bodhidharma, understanding and having the techniques and knowledge about meditation, as I talked about before, when you pay attention to what the ancient Egyptians was using the techniques for, and when you go to Kemet, you can see they have on a lot of the on the walls and a lot of the the pillars or what have you, you can see the techniques, the stance that they took in preparing for meditation. So again, this is another one of the ways we can see how the connection comes together with Buddhism and ancient Kemet, because Bodhidharma understood these techniques, and we can look at India as well and understand that, yes, they do have an ancient history of martial arts. And obviously, Bodhidharma knew it, and he brought it into the Shaolin Temple in China. And the fact that they recognize him as being the first patriarch is huge. It's huge for Buddhism. It's huge for understanding the history of Buddhism, which a lot of people are ignorant about and believe that Buddhism began in China with the Chinese. And a lot of times when we see monks, we don't always see the monks in India. A lot of people look at the yogis in India and go more towards that, Hinduism or what have you. And a lot of people don't like to make that connection with Buddhism in India and the fact that, the Indians brought Buddhism into China. So you had Bodhidharma bringing Chan Buddhism into China, teaching it to the Chinese, teaching the Shaolin monks these techniques. And a lot of people connect Shaolin with Kung Fu. And they go hand in hand, not knowing that before they ever known Kung Fu, they were just monks who knew no fighting techniques or what have you, until Bodhidharma came in there and began to teach them a series of stances, a series of moves and things to help them develop and to be able to meditate and stay in a meditative position for prolonged periods of time. So Bodhidharma came into the Shaolin Temple and taught them techniques and movements to help build their strength and endurance so they can sit in the meditative lotus position for long periods of time, so they can help and develop with meditation or what have you, so they can have combat techniques and self-defense techniques at their disposal and to use and develop, which of course we know they did. So, a lot of times when you see depictions of Bodhidharma, he looks white. You see him like looking white with a long beard. And Bodhidharma was talked about by different civilizations. So, he existed, he's a real dude. So the Japanese talked about him, of course, the Chinese and people in India, what have you. So he's written about by many different civilizations. So this is a real dude that existed. And Bodhidharma, he had blue eyes. They called him the blue-eyed barbarian. And because he was supposedly like stocky dude or what have you with this long black beard. He was in good physical shape, as they describe him. He was no joke. Now, he probably looked like this guy right here. You understand, African people, we have blue eyes too. Indian people have blue eyes as well. So a lot of people want to, of course, bring them over to the European side and say, yeah, you see, Bodhidharma was, European now. We have those eyes as well. We have, of course, the long beards and what have you. And I believe that if you've seen the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Nemo, I think this is where they used Bodhidharma when they created Nemo. Even if you go back to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where you have Captain Nemo and everything, I don't really give you an understanding about his origin or what have you. But Jules Verne, the guy who wrote the book, has another book called Mysterious Island, where you have Nemo, basically, whose name was Dakar, who was a prince. Just like you have Bodhidharma, who's a prince, you have Dakar in that book, who's a prince. And he would later become Nemo and, get into science and physics or what have you, and create the Nautilus, the ship or what have you, the sword of the sea and all that. I think that's probably where they got the depiction from, thinking about Bodhidharma and creating Nemo or what have you. A lot of people make that connection. And remember, Nemo was no joke. He kicked ass as far as martial arts. When you look at the movie and when you understand the comics or what have you, and when they show him fighting, clearly this dude was a Kung Fu master. And a lot of people would never make that connection unless you dig in and doing the research and you start seeing so many different things pop up as relation to Bodhidharma, and how much so many people talked about how bad this dude was and what he meant to China, what he brought to the Chinese people. Now, when you look and pay attention, it's not so many people that we see, movies and even throughout history that we can find from India pertaining to martial arts. I mean, you don't really make that connection too much. I mean, you had Capcom at least put Dao Sim from Street Fighter. In the game, they had a Indian character, powerful and had moves or what have you, and they put him in a game. So they kind of gave people some kind of understanding that possibly India could possess, fighters with, techniques and skills or what have you. So as I talked about in energy and in frequency, in the dream state, when you look at that person that is you, the mental projection of your digital self that looks real, and you start to understand, like, movement in the dream it feels, almost exactly the same as in real life. Everything is kind of cloudy and fuzzy or what have you, but for the most part, you can't really make a determination of, real or not real. You just really, you caught up in a dream state. So when you start understanding the fluidity of movement and energy in the body, and you become familiar with that, and you take control of that, it'll be easy for you to break out of it and control that same energy, just like you do in the body on the conscious level, but in the dream state on a subconscious level, once you start getting to that point. Same thing in meditation, when you start getting to that point, when we're talking about you consciously controlling energy that looks like you, that is you, but on an energetic level, and you being able to make those connections in movement because you have the knowledge of muscle memory, how energy flows through the body, and how you're supposed to move using your spiritual body in a meditative state and a dream state. So this all goes hand in hand. It's a big deal. It's really deep when you start getting into it. And there's a lot of books, which some is popping up on the screen now, that you can get into and really start to understand about this stuff and how important it is to have this muscle memory and have this energetic memory and understand how energy is flowing through you and how it's going to help you develop in meditation and help you be able to sustain these long meditative sessions. Because I'm telling you, the monks, when you get to that level, I mean, you talking about these people be meditating for hours, multiple hours, and it's deep. So you got to really have strong muscles and good muscle memory to not have your muscles bother you, with aches and pains while you're in that position for so long. So all this stuff goes really back into consciousness and energy. It's really martial arts used for those purposes to develop and to have, martial arts skills and self-defense skills, and at the same time develop your energy. Now, you see in a lot of those martial arts movies, you hear of a lot of martial arts masters talking about, using your skills only when needed. To learn all this kung fu, learn about karate and fighting, but not to use it. That was always the thing. You're not supposed to use the stuff. Just use it. It's an art. Use it to develop yourself, develop your energy, but don't use the stuff to harm people unless you have to. And when you have to use your art, you're supposed to do so to defend and protect, not so much to harm unless it absolutely comes down to that point. I know when I was taking it in the military, that's one of the things that they taught us. And, you have to really understand what you can do at that level, how the regular average person has absolutely no clue how much danger they are in when they encounter a person with that kind of skill, which is why it's always encouraged to just use the skill for the spiritual purposes and understand that while you have these techniques, you're not to really use them. So it's deep, it's crazy. And one of the things you're going to start to find when you start to really dig into all this stuff, especially Buddhism, especially looking at the many martial art forms that exist, which we'll get into a lot of them, not deeply talk about them, but you see how all this stuff goes back to energy, frequency, vibration, exactly what we were just talking about. So you have what meditation. You have japa meditation, which japa meditation is basically when you meditate with music, with chanting, with mantras. So while you are in the meditative position, you basically hum or sing a mantra of something that you wish to obtain, something you're trying to do. and you will hum this mantra, put this mantra out as a song. Because remember, we're talking about music and stimulation. This has to do with vibration and frequency. So while you humming and singing this mantra, you basically run your hand across each mala bead. And you see a lot of times where Buddhist monks carrying the mala beads or the beads, you see, they carry the beads or what have you. Now, the thing is, the mala beads, it's 108 beads on that mala, on the mala bead. 108. You can count them for yourself. Trust me, it's 108. But we know, if you've seen Frequency DVD, we know 108 translates into 9. Now, also, when you go to the Shaolin Temple, when you go to the Tibetan temples, the Buddhist temples or what have you in Tibet and Thailand, it's 108 steps. 108 steps. We're seeing a lot of times, look at the pictures, you see that it's always all these stairs leading up to these temples. Trust me, I know I had to climb when I was in Thailand up to the temple in the sky. If you look at my intro on the video, I think right before one of the last videos is me. It's in the temple in the sky in Thailand. So you go up a lot of steps, 108 steps to get up there to these temples. So again, 108 translates into 9. Another thing, when you look at the 108 auspicious symbols on the bottom of Buddha's feet. Auspicious basically means, promising, favorable. So you have the 108 auspicious symbols on the bottom of Buddha's feet. When I went to Thailand, again, I took the picture with the Buddha statue for a reason. I took a picture by his feet for a reason because I understood what was on the bottom of his feet, which I also clearly took a picture of that. And you have these 108 symbols again. 108 equals 9. Here we have again that number 9 being really important.